I think we're back. Okay, great. So thank you everybody for joining us for the first half of the Gaussian Splatting meetup. Now we're in the second half, which is going to be a panel discussion. And today I'm joined by Christie Lau, digital artist of augmented and virtual worlds, and Edmund Fraser, London-based photographer and director. And I'm really pleased to be speaking with them today because I've really been following their Gaussian splatting work with delight and also a little bit of envy, if I'm honest. And I think that Felix has a video he can show, which will be sort of a demo of the work.
Yeah, no, I've decided to like put together some of like our latest work in the reel. We did a project with Dot Martens very recently, and we sort of like for their collaboration with Nine Inch Nails. So that came out a couple weeks ago. We currently have a project on where we're doing these like rave scenes of these like dancers and sort of making like a large group scene with it. But yeah, no, Edmund and I have been like working together, just like experimenting with like sort of long exposure with like 40 camera technique, and then I sort of like bring it within Unreal Engine and do sort of like interesting camera movements with it.
View. And my question is really for both of you. And that's just, how did you get started in Gaussian splatting? Or maybe the better question is why did you start using Gaussian splatting?
Okay. Chris, shall I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been working with multi-camera techniques for about 12 years. So I started off doing like bullet time stuff with, I think, 12 cameras. I was very proud of when I first started doing stuff with that. Because I really it became quite accessible, that technology, to start working with bullet time with the kind of prosumer cameras that kind of were available in the late 2000s. And I sort of carried on with that. And then I started going into photogrammetry in about 2016, 2017. And it was always kind of like a kind of side interest. It was never something that I could turn into something that worked for a client or something that worked for a genuine use case. And it's quite expensive to shoot that kind of stuff, as people who work in capture will know. So you sort of need to have, as fun as it is to do, you sort of need to have a place for this kind of work to go. And two things changed in the last 24 months, I suppose. First thing was starting to work with Christie, because Christie was able to start working with the assets in a way that I wasn't, working with Unreal and like how we place the work. We were actually starting to work together pre 3DGS being on a kind of public release, I suppose. And then as soon as that came out, that literally, it made the work I'd already done suddenly look like 10 times better, not like twice as good, but like 10 times better. And didn't take 3 days to render, could render in 45 minutes. And then Christie kind of solved a lot of the issues with how we started deploying the assets. So in Unreal Engine, and obviously we're looking at VR, AR, mixed reality kind of stuff as well. So that's sort of how we got there. In terms of how it appeals to me, I come from a photographic background, and Gaussian splatting allows me to keep all the things that I like about the images. It lets me keep the color, lets me keep the long exposure, lets me keep the kind of happy accidents, that kind of stuff. And then lets me then have it kind of step into this kind of 3D world with all the opportunities that offers. So it's really super exciting time for sure.
I think it's funny. I have a photography background as well, and so the way you talk about Gaussian splatting are exactly the thoughts that went through my mind when I first encountered them. So Christie, can you tell me a bit more about how you came to Gaussian splatting, sort of what you were doing, and then how you got into it?
So I basically came into Gaussian splatting through Real Dreams, which is kind of like this AI like artist collective, and I was sort of doing some work with Justin because he was sort of exploring the use cases of like nerfs and like 3D like 3D scanning for like filmmaking, and so that's sort of like my entryway into it. I was sort of exploring like revisiting like these frozen moments and like, you know, what can I do within the 3D space, like what kind of impossible camera movements would be interesting within that space. And so that was sort of how I got into 3D.js. And as Evan mentioned before, we were working together previously. This was before like Gaussian splatting came out, and so we were just doing like, it was just like normal photogrammetry, but we were like running the same sort of like data sets and playing around with like different photographic techniques within that. But we've never gotten the results that we wanted out of it, just because like the look and feel of like photogrammetry just didn't like it just didn't have that photographic quality, as you were saying. And so yeah, no, when all the Gaussian like commercially viable like Gaussian splatting tools came out, we just sort of like reran some of these old data sets, and everything like looked really nice. And it was kind of still like a ongoing like work in progress in terms of like, you know, like there were new tools, new plugins for Gaussian splatting in Unreal that like coming out over like the last year, and so sort of like experimenting with that. You know, obviously the Luma one is great, but there's also like, you know, like the other, oh gosh, I forgot the name. The Akia Institute one also did one. But we've just sort of since then been working together to sort of like see like how we can sort of reshoot these 3D assets, I suppose. But yeah, no, I think it plays into the whole like wider like world building side, which is incredibly exciting to me, to be able to sort of like bring these like real world scenes and reinterpret them in 3D in Unreal.
So I mean, what's really I think striking about your work, I mean, besides like, you know, the quality of it, is that, you know, you seem to have successfully bridged into the commercial market, so that, you know, you did that amazing collaboration with Doc Martens. Can you talk to me a bit about the commercial side? I mean, it seems like an amazing thing to get a big brand to buy into something as bleeding edge as Gaussian splatting is. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, it's weirdly less hassle than you'd think, actually, because these brands, I work a lot in this, and that's something I'm quite used to in terms of pitching this kind of stuff at these kind of people. And I find people are looking always, the people, their jobs are to find people who are doing something that is bleeding edge. Do you know what I mean? You don't, obviously you want to reach out to people, you want to market yourself and all these kind of things, but there are literal art buyers whose jobs it is to find you. The point where you become something of value to them, I think, and shoot me down, anyone else, is when you do. We worked with some of this demo stuff you've seen is with a choreographer I was working with, and that allowed us to do something that felt more culturally relevant. Like it was real people, real things, something quite visceral. And that was the thing that gets people's attention. It's not necessarily, people can't see the techniques. You and a lot of people on this chat will see the techniques and see the possibilities. But for a lot of people, they sort of need something real they can latch onto in terms of the subject material to kind of bring those two things together. And I sort of see that's what my role is that I have one foot in the technical camp, like a very small foot in the technical camp compared to a lot of people here. But another foot in the kind of I suppose like the cultural camp of where it will sit, like what's the point of it. So in terms of selling it in, surprisingly, anything's possible if it's just, you know, if your test material is done the right way, I think.
Yeah. And how about like on the technical side, for either of you? You know, I assume that there's, you know, you sort of a strong need for, you know, the colors to be right, the lighting to be right, the color spaces and that kind of thing. Were there any challenges around that, adapting Gaussian splatting, which has sort of come, as you said, from a very sort of technical background, to get it to merge into media workflows? I mean, Christie, that might have been your area, but like you had to deliver something that Doc Martens could use for their advertising material. Were there any challenges in that regard?
There's been a lot of troubleshooting in terms of two main things. I suppose I'll touch on briefly here before I'm sure Christie has things to say on this. One is under my current rig, and I think I can do it differently. I've got about 45 cameras shooting, I think. The quality falls apart as soon as you move in, as I'm sure you've noticed. And when, so if you've got a product or something like that you need to incorporate, that doesn't work. But then we found if I shoot the product separately and then comp it together, then you can zoom in as much as you want. It looks fantastic. The other really weird thing is the kind of artifacts, the clouding. I'm used to shooting on a kind of a good place to shoot would be on a cove. So like a white cove is a nice place to shoot. Gaussian splatting interprets that as clouds, which can look quite good, but can look, can be a bit of a nightmare for cleanup. So that's another thing. So I've started trying to include more things in the background of scenes and things like that, so it makes sure that it's broken up.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like part of the process as well, because like with something like the cove, say for example, or like sort of like these like gradient backgrounds that we were working with, it was just a matter of like running it to see like what comes out and then being like, this actually visually works really nicely, like if we lit it dynamically, say. And so you kind of come out with like unexpected sort of like look and feel from like what you initially like put in as like your processing data, I guess. And also like I think things just sort of like came together. Like I know like on Ed's side it was like, we were considering product before, being like, would it be possible to sort of like comp different splats together? And so like, I sort of like did some digging, being like, okay, actually we could combine them together. And then like, the use case came like from this project. And we literally did like a shoe test like before that. And so it sort of like lends itself really nicely into this project.
Cool. I see there's a question in the chat, so I'm gonna bring it up. So it's Mark Roth is asking, with all your experience, what tools would you recommend to someone who is new to Gaussian splatting and wants to learn about the process?
I think literally just phone and like the commercially like viable like apps. I think like Luma, because I was like playing around with Luma a bit, like myself, and Polycam, because they're so easy just to like scan. Sometimes I just like take it out like when I go to like a museum and just like take a bunch of photos of different things and then like just run little data sets there. But yeah, I'd say like those apps work great. For
It
someone
sounds like just do it, and then in the process of doing it, you'll kind of find your way.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we're doing, I mean, you don't really need the setup that we do, except if you want to do something like an actual freeze real people and real things, then that's great. But like if you want to build something, with objects or people around you which look a bit off, like that's fine. You don't need what we've got, I think, to do that at all.
Okay. And then, just sort of a follow-on to that would be, with your experience, so you've been making heavy use of the tools and processes that are available. What would make it easier or better for you to do what you do? Are there times when you think, I wish it did this, or wouldn't it be great if they made something that did that? What are sort of the pain points, or what are you looking forward to come out in Gaussian splatting in the future?
I mean, Christie definitely has a massive shopping list. For me, it's the resolution. I'll be honest with you, and that I've always put that down to the way I'm capturing it. But I'm hoping it's hard to invest heavily into hardware when I know the software is moving so fast. So if I go out and buy another 100 cameras, which, you know how much that costs. But then someone does something which allows the software to start scaling. So the resolution becomes something that I want in the next 6 months, which is highly probable looking at the amazing work everyone's doing in this space. That's sort of what I'm after, to be honest with you, which is, it doesn't sound as super creative, but in terms of how you get budgets and how it goes into the market, That's always the number one kind of thing, is like, can you see the product? Can you see the things? You can do something as artistically interesting or credible as you want, but if it's too janky or it's too, off, you'll never get a budget for it that validates the setup that you need.
Yeah, the product, you're selling the product, right? The product has to really sing.
The product or the talent or whatever you're doing. Like, it's just, that's for commercial budgets. Like, I'm sure there's people doing like amazing artistic work who can crack on with whatever they're doing. But yeah, for us, that's sort of what we need. Yeah.
How about you, Christie? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in terms of like my side, it's still more just like exploring how to sort of play around with those like particles, like, because the way that the sort of Gaussians come in and the way that we're using it in Unreal, it's like it comes in as like a Niagara particle system, and so it's kind of like playing around with these like VFX sort of effects with like the particle system, and I think like as was mentioned previously in this meetup, like the way that it interacts with light, it doesn't do shadows, it doesn't do like hard surfaces, and so actually like so the presentations earlier from Ivan was really interesting, speaking about like how light interacts with like Gaussians. I think like that side of things to me is interesting as like a 3D artist, because I can really see like how the scenes are quite different, like what I make in 3D, like a solid mesh, versus like when I'm shooting Gaussians. Like, I often struggle with like the depth of field as well, like when I'm trying to like focus in on something, but actually it's quite like it's quite impressionistic and soft anyways, with like the kind of with the output that we're getting. So I think definitely for on my side, it's like anything to sort of improve on like the 3D or like playing around with VFX, and also like the Unreal in camera stuff that I can do.
Yeah. So it sounds like Gaussian splatting is still not like that well integrated into the mainstream tools you use for VFX.
No, not really. It's still like a learning process for me, I think. Yeah.
Could you, I mean, since, most of us don't have, big rigs of cameras, most of us are shooting with, one or two cameras. Can you talk about the shoots you did for any of your artistic work or working with it, and how that differed from just doing a normal photography shoot? Can you talk a bit about that?
I mean, to be honest with you, it's not that far off. I mean, because I've been working with multi-camera kind of bullet time rigs before, it's not a huge difference in terms of like how you direct the talent. It sort of works the same way because people walk onto set.
Sorry if I could just interject. Most of us never shot bullet time. So can you talk about what that means? How are you thinking differently from using one camera?
You're thinking about the whole scene. You're giving someone a space, I think, to perform, I think, is the best way of doing it. So if you're shooting someone with one camera, it's very much like an interaction between you and that person.
Yeah.
You just kind of you capture that conversation in a way. Different people shoot differently, by the way, but like that's one way of looking at it. When you start shooting with bigger rigs, whether it's bullet time or this, it's a bit like, whoa, what is this? So the way I find the best way to do it is to give people the sort of that freedom and that opportunity and that space to use it as they see fit, with a bit of direction. Because that kind of one-on-one interaction sort of falls apart the moment you're surrounded by 50 or 100 cameras. In terms of how it works, in terms of the setup, and I suppose it's not really relevant, but in terms of the setup, it operates pretty close to a normal still shoot otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then so once you have flat, so you've captured it. Or sorry, I should back up a moment. Once you've captured, so you've used your 45 cameras or however many cameras, and you've captured all the images. What happens next? Can you walk me through, like, for Christie and for you, Edmund, what happens next? So you've done the capture. the performers have gone home, then what do you do?
We do
Well,
like a selections process.
Yeah, what's that like?
so I mean, so what I do is I put one camera now. I used to have a system where I tried to put all the cameras into the computer. So I'd take a shot, we get everything come in, but it was just it was annoyingly slow. It was like even if I linked up four different PCs, it would take, you know, 30 seconds per image to get all the data sets in. So what I found is a much more kind of DIY version, which works well for me, to be honest with you, which is I put one camera on tether into the computer. So we see one still come up, so everyone can see that and see what we're doing, which is the same as any other still sheet. And everything else is onto SD card. And that's where it sits until after the shoot. And then after that, I go through the pretty torturous process of taking all the SD cards out, uploading everything, offloading everything off the cards, sorting out all the file. This is quite boring, but sorting out all the file names so they align.
Yeah.
And then I'll work with Christie or whoever on the selects of the individual stills, and start what I often do if we're making comps is start kind of sticking the stills together and kind of writing notes next to that.
Okay.
To see kind of how they might fit together, because you're looking at, it's hard because the rules of like composition sort of fall apart, isn't that? You're looking at like what's a good like energy in this scene, like is something cool going on here? Do you know what I mean? You're not looking at like, is that arm interacting with that? It doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? It's more like, is this cool? And then that'll all come off. And then Christie, do you want to jump in here on the post stuff?
On the post stuff. Yeah, I mean, like we get the stuff off the cards and then like we upload them to like the different platforms that we use. But we've used both like Luma and Polycam. We've also tried out like Nurse Studio as well. And then from there on out, it would just be like getting the PLY file. And I import that into Unreal. Out of like the 3 plugins that is on the Epic Games Marketplace, honestly like the Luma one is the best one, I find anyway.
I've heard that.
Yeah. I mean, like, because we had to do our sort of like research, being like, which plugin is best? And I guess with like the Luma one, it's like the being able to sort of like dynamically relight things has been great for us. Yeah, like I would normally like take that in. There's like a few I've kind of been over like the months that we've been working together, like gotten better with like, you know, the virtual sort of cinematography, I guess. Like, you know, there's like certain movements that work better with like the splats, I think, depending on what the scene is. But I'd sort of like find the best angles of like where it looks good, and like, you know, because beyond like a certain angle with like the setup that we've got, like, you know, it falls apart, and so you sort of try and stay within like the angle that it still looks good, the capture angle. And yeah, I guess like within that, it's just I mean, for myself, I really like doing these like arc movements, or like, you know, rotations always work really nicely, especially with comps, when like the nice looking side is out.
When you say comps, is that multiple splats?
Yes, Christie, you missed a bit there. So we do the after they come out of whatever we're processing it in. I or Christie will do that in Unity together. I cheat a bit. I use a bit of Super Splat sometimes, just because I quite like the cleanup tool.
I'm really glad
I can do it all in.
That. Yeah, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I was interested because you've been mentioning Unity, Unreal, but so there's other tools that you also like. So you're using Super Splat and Unity as well in your work.
Yes, Christie foolishly showed me how to use Unity to do the comps. Which you know, they were really busy one day and they were like, "Can you do it?" And then I've got really into it, so I'm quite enjoying it. And so I've kind of been building these comps in that, and sometimes they get a bit out of control. It's like, because you can start replicating, you can start building quite big scenes, which is quite fun. And it's quite a janky plugin, but it does work. And then that I explore, and then I often do another level of cleanup in Super Splat again.
Sure.
Again, I honestly just quite like the tool. It's quite easy.
Yeah.
It feels like cheating a bit because Unity has the functionality, but Super Splat I just quite like. And then that goes back as comps to Christie, who then puts that into Unreal to do the virtual DOPing and the dynamic lighting.
So Christie, this might be like not a great question, but I'm curious about, you mentioned world building, I think, a moment ago, and I was curious, like, do you see a place for Gaussian splatting in like the metaverse, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think because at least within like my work, I'm sort of still seeing like how to sort of combine the Gaussian slots within like my more 3D practice, I suppose. I have played around with like working with like 3D assets that like as 3D assets with the splats, like putting splats in like an actual like 3D environment.
Okay.
But like it always looked quite jarring in terms of like just because like our workflow as it is right now, it's very impressionistic, and so like anything that has like real like ray tracing and stuff in Unreal just looks quite jarring. I think like I've sort of like started exploring a little bit like AR usage with like Gaussian splats and stuff. Because I feel like I haven't gone back into like doing AR stuff. My background has like I was doing a lot more AR stuff previously. And I mean, I think it's like sort of like the interplay of like real life scenes within the digital space. I think that's quite like the pull for me with like Gaussian splats. Like being able to sort of like there's like something that you can't really account for with Gaussian splats, like how it's going to come out, or like the kind of almost like chaotic nature of like the artifacting, kind of like the organic within the digital, and like in a world where like I feel like I'm in charge whenever I'm like in Unreal, like the Gaussian splats kind of like that little element of like surprise. So that part is I really enjoy, I guess.
That's so true. I was actually relieved a moment ago when Ivan was talking about how if you run a splat 2 times, you'll get 2 different results. And I thought, oh, thank God I'm not crazy. It's not just me that I'm getting like different results with the same inputs. How about, I mean, I get like some of your work that I looked at that I thought was really interesting was fashion related. Do you ever have any interest in applying Gaussian splatting to digital fashion or other aspects like that?
I mean, yeah, I think like I guess like the immediate like thing that comes to mind with like Gaussian splatting is definitely like sort of the environment building around like virtual world building, or like I don't know, at least like for me, digital fashion exists on digital characters, and those digital characters make sense with the world. It's contextualized within like a digital environment. And so like it all comes together like hand in hand, I think. I haven't personally like because in my other like Unreal work I do like metahuman characters and stuff. I haven't been able to find a way to sort of integrate splats within that pipeline specifically at the moment yet. This is sort of like I kind of view splats as more in like part of the environment than like actual characters. I don't know, maybe that will change soon. I think like just because like the way that I've been using like sort of Unreal metahumans and stuff, and like the kind of workflow, it's sort of quite separate, but sort of exist within the same like digital world, I suppose.
I mean that sounds like similar to some of the things other people have been talking about, how they've been really excited about Gaussian splats to use as backgrounds projected onto LED volumes for virtual production, or to use them for driving plates that can be sort of customized to match the lens that you're using to film the actors in the car. So I think I think that you're looking at it, for the environment building, matches what like a lot of people are kind of excited about Gaussian splatting. I think, if you're someone like me doing it on a small scale, you tend to be like capturing a person or capturing an object. But yeah, I think the environment building sounds like a really exciting area for bigger productions.
Yeah. I mean, there's also something with like sort of capturing people and sort of seeing them like in the camera moves I'm doing, or like in the work that we do. Kind of like seeing these people more like objects, I guess. Which is kind of like fun for us, I think. Yeah.
How about, so Edmund, something that comes up all the time is like, what focal length? Like, and I know that's kind of maybe a
Real?
boring question, but I remember that, someone asked me like, what focal length they're using, and I said, oh, I'm using 24 mil, and they were like, what? You're crazy. You should be using a fisheye for this. So can you put this question to rest once and for all and say
I mean,
what's the focal length everyone should use all the time?
I'm just gonna precondition that with absolutely do not listen to anything that I say about how to do things technically, because honestly, like the way I've always shot stuff again on photogrammetry, bullet time, all these things is always, it's never the right way. It's always been a way that's quite DIY, and everything's a little bit off.
Sure.
And and Gaussian splatting lets me sort of get away with that. I'll be honest with you. I think leaning into the imperfection is a good thing. I think it gives you a certain sense of aesthetic. But as you're asking what the best focal length is, to be honest with you, in terms of how I've done rig setups, I keep them variable, actually. Like I keep some lenses quite wide and then zoom some quite close in, so either between 18 or 55. And it's variable, like genuinely. And often like Gaussian splatting lets you not be perfect within those lenses, if that makes sense. So I just again, like a kind of maybe a boring technical question, but so are you finding that you're successful feeding in images of multiple focal lengths at the same capture, and Luma or whatever is handling that? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it actually works better with it, actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
I mean, the best way I've found, and again, I don't want to say the wrong thing in case anyone thinks differently, but to conceive, when you start working with 3DGS, it's more like an interpolator than a 3D render. Is in like the way you kind of structure the cameras, because you're thinking like, how do I lay the cameras out so I get the best possible image? And I was looking at some of the ones people were making on Polycam and stuff like that, and you'd see things with a kind of, like I said, a bullet time rig, where if you follow the camera around that bit, it actually looks pretty good. As soon as you deviate, it sort of holds itself together, but starts falling apart. So if you sort of know where your camera is going to be in the scene, you can sort of plan the images around that. Whereas when photogrammetry was more about how can I get as many different data points together, this doesn't work that way at all, as far as I can work out.
So that's really interesting. Sorry, I have to interrupt. So are you planning out your camera movements, or sort of you're planning out your final before you even capture the images?
I'm considering it, but I'm not. For example, I don't see the point in having loads and loads of overhead cameras if I know I'm not going to use that.
Sure.
So I'm still spacing them out. I'm still giving us the options, but I'm giving like a solid level of thought as to where the density is likely to be. For sure.
Okay, that's really key. And then I was going to ask, but please don't let me force you into giving away any secret sauce. But I'm curious about like camera syncing. Like, do you just fire off the cameras? I mean, or do you have like some way that you sync them up? Or
I've got my own very janky technique, which I'm not going to share just because I don't think it's a very good way of doing it. But you can get those Esper boxes, which is actually a better way of doing it. To be honest with you. And they do exactly the same job but better. I just when you've done something a certain way before they came out, and you just stick with it. But I actually think that's the better solution. The ESPER boxes.
I built a whole network of cables to fire off multiple cameras at once, and I was really proud of it. And it was just like you're just closing a switch, and they all go. And I showed it to somebody, and they said, "There's not a single diode on that circuit, and you're going to fry all your cameras, and you should never ever do that." But
So far, so good. I think you're probably doing it the same way I am. Which do you see what I mean? I don't want to share it more because I think
yeah,
people
no,
will judge me for how bad it is. But
I'll just put in a legal
works.
note where we won't accept any responsibility for damage you do to
No.
your equipment by following any of our terrible ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would say that though, like, you know, I don't think there's any wrong answers in the sense that when I was starting out and maybe like you, I was like doing photogrammetry and then I started drifting into NERF and then Gaussian splatting. Because many people in this area come from an engineering discipline, maybe they're doing, you know, aerial surveys for construction or they're inspecting a bridge or whatever. And where, you know, utmost precision is a requirement, you know, when they looked at what I was doing, they would like probably cry or sob or start
Oh
drinking,
yeah.
whatever. But you know, for what maybe I was doing, which was not building bridges or ensuring that a building doesn't fall down, but just, you know, making images, you know, it was okay. And maybe you've kind of pointed out the sort of the things that go wrong and the sort of the happy accidents and the sort of flexibility of these techniques is quite exciting, I think, and allows you to have put some artistic expression in these things that came out of maybe an engineering discipline, actually.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and we're always keeping an eye on kind of what are the latest things. I mean, 4DGS we're looking at very hard at the moment as well. It's the number one question I get from potential clients and all those sort of things.
How might a client use that? So again, would that be for a product or
again, another number one question is that I think we sit in quite an interesting space in that we are small. It's just really me and Christie. We're pretty nimble. We're not tight. We're not like one of the big Pinewood or something. I know they've got loads of 200 camera rigs and all these things.
Yeah.
It's very expensive for them. For me, it's sort of, you know, it's all in boxes. It's quite easy to do. So it's easy to experiment and think of use cases and how we can start working with the material. And that's the number one thing I find people coming from a technical background often doesn't necessarily come naturally in quite the same way. So I kind of see our sort of role in the next 6 months is how do we work out use cases and how do we start integrating this into something that actually, you know, has a purpose, either artistically or commercially. And at the moment, we've been working with Unreal. We're looking at mixed reality. We're looking at the spatial stuff for sure. And we're also looking at kind of, as you say, integrations into traditional filmmaking, like the volume stuff.
Have you mentioned, you know, 4DGS. Have you already done some experiments in 4DGS?
We have like very, very, very janky is in using I won't get too into it because I'll talk for ages. But using about 20 motion feeds and then kind of literally like syncing the feeds with a flash so you know sort of where it is. And it's a rolling shutter. It's not a global shutter. Don't get me started. We sort of built something that sort of works in a kind of weird stylistically odd way. So we are looking at kind of developing that. And the way I see it is that if we keep sort of working and doing our thing, even if it's not perfect, other things that we're not working on will sort of develop in parallel. It seems like there's kind of this flow of direction through lots of really intelligent, this community of like really intelligent, driven people. And being a part of that, you know, from a very left field direction is great for us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good. I mean, it's good to like get your thoughts on this. And Christie, I'm going to turn to you in a second to get your thoughts on sort of what your plans are for the next 6 months. So get ready, but just be aware that, you know, like in the audience there are NERF Studio developers, and as you've seen, right, there's people who are working on, you know, the fundamental building blocks of the tools we're using. So they're listening. So it's a great opportunity. So I think that anything you say will be of real interest to people who are developing these tools because right, there's multiple sides to this, right? There's the developers, there's the people commercializing it, there's the users, you know, everybody's sort of involved in this community around Gaussian splatting or radiance fields in general. So I'm turning to you, Christie, now. So what, you know, what are your plans for the next 6 months? Like what are things that you're interested in or you might like take a look at, or, you know, what's on your mind?
I think definitely like exploring sort of use cases for like Gaussian splats within like immersive experiences. Actually, we're putting on a exhibition in September,
Oh,
sort of showcasing some of our Gaussian splats with like the ravers. And
awesome.
so, yeah. That's quite interesting, and like for me, coming as like more of like a digital art kind of interest and background, that's sort of what I would like to explore more, like definitely like experiential, like Gaussian spots for like experiential stuff. Like whether that being like, immersive kind of spaces or like AR or like mixed reality. I think that's definitely something that both me and Edmund are really interested in like getting into that space.
When you mention immersive, is that something along the lines of, you walk into a room and there's huge displays on the walls, or VR, or is it multiple?
Yeah. So like projection on within the space. So yeah, we're kind of putting together. I'm putting together like the visuals for that exhibition coming in September. So yeah,
Awesome.
it'll be
And
really
where will
interesting.
it be? In which
Ah,
city?
so this will be in London.
Okay.
It's gonna be in the Art Hotel Hoxton, and this is with like in collaboration with them and Artset Gallery. I've done some like shows at Artset Gallery before, and so this is quite nice to be able to sort of showcase these like Gaussian spots within that space. And we're continually like figuring out in terms of like because we're so used to seeing these art like the splats on like a screen, and then so
Yeah.
when we see them in the space, it's like, oh wow, these are massive.
Yeah.
And we like certain things work like I think because they're so soft, in the way that we've been shooting them anyway in Unreal. That sort of informs me in terms of like what I need to do within like the virtual within the virtual cinematography. Just because like it when you see something like blown up that big, then like it for me it would be like playing around with like the depth of field, the focus. And so like my virtual sensor size is like something ridiculous, like 1,200 mil or something. And so it's just seeing the splats on in different digital mediums,
Yeah.
but more like experiential mediums.
Yeah, that's such a good point because like you, I'm used to just looking at splats on my phone or on my desktop machine. But yeah, looking ahead to those more immersive mediums, whether it's a big presentation like you were talking about, or on a mixed reality headset. If someone wants to send me a Apple Vision Pro, I'll take it happily. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think it's really cool that you're looking to other ways in which to present Gaussian splats,
Yeah,
not just
and
on.
definitely like more also like on the interactive side as well. Like I'm currently like still figuring out like my own pipeline for like audio reactive kind of Gaussian splats.
Oh,
And so like that side of things really makes me excited, I think. Like just being able to sort of like mess with them. Make them interactive, I suppose. Yeah.
so that's fantastic. So that show, did you say is September in London?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
The opening night is September 6th. Yeah.
September 6th. Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay. So I think we're actually exactly at time. So I think it's a good place to wrap it up. So thank you, Christie. Thank you, Edmund. Thank you for sharing so much. It was a great conversation, and I think the audience will really have enjoyed it. And thank you for all your time to contribute to this because we really appreciate it.